Hey everybody, welcome back to World History with Mr. Finn. Today we are continuing with Roman culture. So, culture itself. We've talked about culture before, in this case Roman culture. Culture is going to be everything that makes up a civilization. From some of the things we talked about, language, talked about art and architecture last time. Today we're going to talk about three topics about everyday life for Romans living during this time period as we're looking at, say year zero towards around 200 AD. Now remember, this is the empire now. We have an emperor, and this is the golden era, the height of Roman civilization is occurring during this time. They have pretty much taken over everything around the Mediterranean. There's no outstanding wars going on with other civilizations at this point. The borders have been shored up. Everything's pretty good in the Roman civilization at this time period. So, one of the things that we're going to see as we get to this point is rights. Rights for really people in general, but let's be more specific and say rights for women are going to be something that are going to be happening during this time period. And children even. Early in the Roman Empire and Roman civilization, the men dominated all aspects of life. The men were the ones that could vote. The men were the ones who ran the government, were in the Senate, councils, all of those political offices, in the military. And women and children had to basically do anything that the men wanted. There was arranged marriages. The women, in a lot of cases, couldn't leave the house. Their job was just to take care of the house and the home. Children, it was so bad early on. Children could be sold into slavery if a man needed to for whatever reason, or if they were misbehaving. Not terrible, but if for some reason they needed to, they could. Which is crazy, yes, but that was kind of the way that it went. Men were in charge. And what we'll see during this time is women will start to be a little bit more visual. They'll be out of the house. They'll be able to attend chariot races and different games. In a lot of cases, they could hold property if their husband had passed away. They were not subject to absolute authority of the man. They could not take place in government, however, but a lot of women had influence on the government and what happened through their husbands. So their husbands would come home, talk things over with their wives, and they would have influence on what that man would go back and do. So we're going to see during this time period, women and children and people in general are going to see a more free living than had been happening earlier in the Roman civilization. On the other hand, what is not going to be free is something that's happening in Roman culture and had always happened in Roman culture was slavery. Slavery was common in all of our civilizations, going all the way back to Egypt and Mesopotamia, everywhere. Slavery was in existence. Now, the difference with slavery that we're talking about in the Roman Empire and in our old civilizations is that it was not based on, I'll even write this, not based on race. It was not based on race. It was not a skin color issue. A lot of people in the United States especially who have American history and things like that, we understand that African Americans today were, slavery in our country was based on race, and slaves were brought here from Africa, and so it was a very racial thing. That was not the case in most civilizations that existed throughout time. Slavery, if you were a slave, basically what might have happened is you might have lost a war. So criminals might be, but if you had lost a war, you might be sold into slavery as a way for the army who had defeated you to have money. And so you would see that slavery during this time period was just, it was based, I mean, you could be any race. I mean, it didn't really matter. It was really about having been conquered as an enemy or had been sold into slavery or taken from your home. There were slave traders, things like that, that would make money as a business selling these people, unfortunately. And slavery was very common. However, the difference is there was a lot of different levels of slavery. So one of the things, and this is why I bring it up, is, let's go over here with slavery. Many slaves, I mean, like for example, if you had a slave from the East who was a Greek slave, could or would be a teacher. So a Greek slave was very expensive, for example, because they could speak Greek, and a Roman family might say, hey, you're going to teach our children. I mean, you're going to be almost part of the family. And another difference is slavery over time. A slave could earn their freedom based on their master. The master says, hey, you know what, you've been very helpful, you've been a part of our family, you've taught my children, I'm going to grant you your freedom. And so in a lot of cases, slaves would be given their freedom. That's not to say, however, all slaves were like that. Many slaves, during even this time or any of our civilizations, would be manual laborers and have a very hard life. Being a slave, no matter when you look at it, is not a good thing and is not a good place to be. But slavery was very common in the Roman Empire, and it was a profitable business for people during that time. And again, not based on race. And you could be a teacher, you might be a manual laborer, you might be just a slave to one person as kind of a servant. It might be a lot of different ways you might be a slave. But again, that would be part of this time period. This would be what you would see if you did go back in time. Last thing, quickly. Let's say this. Overcrowding. There was a lot of people. There was overcrowding. Most people would be considered poor, and they would live in overcrowded apartments, is what we would call them today. They would depend overcrowding and what we call welfare, depending on the government. What I mean by depending on is they would depend on the government for food and pretty much everything. And this was, again, a way, I think I brought this up before, it was a way for the emperor to gain popularity. Hey, I'm handing out mass amounts of food and bread to people. And people would be like, oh, I love this emperor because he's taking care of me. And so if you did go back to Rome itself, you would find it would be a pretty dangerous, kind of dirty place, to say the least. They did have sewer systems, but again, there's 1 million people living in the city, many of which are poor. It would, at night, you probably wouldn't go out walking the streets. There would be nicer areas and poorer areas, just like any city even has today, but it would not be, you couldn't just walk around in the middle of the night because there would be crime in certain areas, and again, it was dirty, and you would smell the grossness in the air, to say the least. So this is kind of what we're looking at. They dominate the Mediterranean. There's certain things that are happening that are good, people getting more rights. There was food, there was trade, there was a lot of good things happening. However, slavery was common, there was overcrowding. These things are not so good. But overall, everything was kind of working for the Roman civilization at this point. There was not a lot of uprisings. So, those are your notes. But as I told you, we got a quiz today. So, go ahead and make your numbers 1 through 4. And let's get to it. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, here we go. Are we ready? Let's flip. Flip to a split in the page. Here we go. I feel like we might have had this one, but it's random. Give me, for number 1, one of the three famous Greek philosophers. Number one of the three famous Greek philosophers that we talked about. That's for number one. Here we go. Flipping. I didn't go back far enough because we're still in the same area. However, again, it's the luck of the draw. Number two. This is a 50-50 question, so it's even easier. Which polis or city-state in ancient Greece had the stronger army? Athens or Sparta? The strongest army, either Athens or Sparta. For number two, which one had the stronger army? There's a chapter review, nothing there. That one, I know we've had on a few, so I'm going to go back a little bit further. I know it's luck of the draw, but, you know, I feel like that's too easy. What I'm saying is it was polytheistic. This is a good one. Number three. Ancient Egypt. In ancient Egypt, give me one of the kingdoms that we talked about. There was three kingdoms that split up ancient Egypt. Give me one of those kingdoms in ancient Egypt. It was split into three. Just give me one. Pick one, give it to me. And last but not least, this goes way back, but should be pretty easy. Give me one example of an artifact. Give me one example of an artifact that, you know, archaeologists use to study ancient cultures. What's one thing that archaeologists study or look at to figure out about ancient civilizations? Give me one example of an artifact. Now let's get this to me today. You guys have been doing a great job. But again, for participation and attendance purposes, I would like to see this turned in and the notes. They can do that as well. Just, you know, check up on it. But this is what I will be grading today. I will see you next class.